The radio in my hand crackled with static that had no source. That was the first thing wrong. The tower on Springer Mountain was less than 9 miles away as the crow flies, and I had used this handheld for 6 years without so much as a hiccup on the ridgeline above the falls. But at 4 in the morning, standing at the observation deck where the water begins its 729-foot descent, I could not raise dispatch, could not reach the visitor center, could not even pull my own call sign back out of the noise. I keyed the mic anyway, whispered my location the way you whisper in a hospital, and put the radio back on my belt. Below me, Amicalola Falls poured into the gorge in 7 long tiers of moving silver. Above me, the Georgia sky was the color of an old bruise. Something in the tree line to my left had been watching me for the last 11 minutes. I had counted. I am the district ranger for this park, and I have walked every mile of these trails, from the entrance station on Georgia 52, all the way up to the arch at the top where the Appalachian Trail approach begins. I know the sound of a black bear pushing through mountain laurel. I know the pattern a whitetail leaves when it bolts through undergrowth. I know what a coyote sounds like at 3 in the morning, and I know what a barred owl sounds like at 4. What was watching me from the tree line was none of those things. I heard the truck before I saw the headlights. 2 vehicles, coming up the switchback road slower than any tourist ever drove them. Engine notes deep and steady. State issue plates, I would find out later. The lead truck stopped where the road ends at the observation lot, and a man stepped down from the passenger side with the deliberate care of a man who has been sitting a long time. He was tall, broad in the shoulders even under his coat, and his hair was gray as river stone. He did not turn on a flashlight. He walked to the edge of the lot, stopped, and looked out at the same tree line I had been watching. "Ranger Bellamy," the driver called out from beside the truck. "That is me," I said. "This is sitting on an eagle tail. He is with the team out of the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. Federal request came down through the interior yesterday afternoon. I was told you would be expecting us." I had been. 2 days before, my supervisor had come up from the office in Atlanta with a briefcase and a face that was trying very hard to look untroubled. 3 people had gone missing in the park in the last 11 days. That was not, in itself, unprecedented. The approach trail to the AT swallows a hiker or 2 every year, and the falls area sees its share of visitors who overestimate their fitness and underestimate the drop-offs. But these 3 had gone missing from different areas, on different days, and each one had left behind something that did not fit. A pack still zipped, a tent still pitched, a pair of boots still laced, standing side by side at the head of the hike-in trail, as if their owner had simply stepped up out of them into the air. The federal government does not send in trackers from a plains reservation on account of missing hikers. The federal government sends in trackers when a specific pattern has been observed in more than one national park in more than one state, and when someone in a corner office in Washington has finally admitted that the pattern does not fit any category that the standard search protocol was ever designed to handle. My supervisor had not put it in those words. He had said the Interior Department wanted cultural expertise on the search. He had said the team included elders whose people had long experience with the kind of country the falls sat in. He had said I would be assigned as liaison, and that I should treat the team's requests as if they were coming from him directly. I walked over to the truck. Sitting on an eagle tail turned when I got within a few paces of him, and his eyes found mine in the pre-dawn gray. They were not what I expected. They were not old man's eyes at all. They were the eyes of someone who is measuring you against a memory of something else. "You feel it," he said. He did not phrase it as a question. "I do not know what I feel," I said. He nodded once. "That is the correct answer." The passenger side of the second truck opened, and a younger man stepped out. Late 20s, maybe, compact and quick-moving, with a long braid down his back and a rifle slung over his shoulder that he handled the way a man handles a familiar tool. "This is Never Comes to Think," sitting on an eagle tail said. "He carries our long gun. He also carries something more useful than that, but the long gun is easier to see." Never Comes to Think looked at me and did not smile. He nodded, once, the way his elder had. More figures were unloading from the trucks. I counted 8 in all before I stopped counting. 2 of them were women. One of them was a boy, no older than 15, moving with a quietness that would have made him a ghost in the woods behind my grandfather's house. The elder gestured toward the boy without looking at him. "Bear child. He is our youngest. He is here to learn." "Learn what?" I asked. Sitting on an eagle tail, looked back at the tree line. The gray was giving way to a thin blue light now, and the shapes of the tulip poplars were beginning to separate themselves from the shapes of the hemlocks. Whatever had been watching me had gone, or had moved, or had simply become better at not being seen. "To learn how to look at what does not want to be looked at," he said. He walked past me toward the trailhead. His team fell in behind him in a loose column without a word being spoken. Running antelope. A woman with a face weathered by 70 winters that had none of them been kind, carried a leather bundle on her back that she treated with more care than the young ones treated their rifles. Crowfoot, a man in his 50s with a long jaw and hands the size of oven mitts, took the drag position at the rear. I stood at the trailhead and watched them walk into the gloom under the trees. Something in me was already telling me not to follow. Some low animal knot in the base of my brain, the one that keeps humans alive when the thinking part of us gets curious. It was telling me to walk back to the truck, drive down to the visitor center, put on the coffee, and let the federal team do whatever the federal team had come to do. I did not listen to it. I followed them into the woods. That was my first mistake. The Appalachian Approach Trail leaves the Amicalola Visitor Center and climbs 604 stone steps up the side of the falls to the top. Most hikers take an hour to make that climb. Some take longer. The team from Montana made the climb in 22 minutes without any of them stopping to catch a breath, and I was behind them the whole way, sucking wind and feeling every one of my 46 years. When we reached the top, they were standing in a rough half-circle around something on the trail. I pushed past Crowfoot to see. It was a print in the mud. Not a footprint, exactly, a print. Something had put weight down on the wet ground, and the ground had held the shape of that weight for us to find. It was longer than my forearm, and half again as wide, 5 toes. A heel that had sunk 2 full inches into the muck. Whatever had made it had been walking away from the falls, toward the approach trail proper, toward the West Ridge Loop and the campgrounds beyond. "How old?" I asked. Never Comes to Think knelt beside the print and touched the mud at its edge with one finger. He tasted the mud. He looked up at sitting on an eagle tail. "Since the last rain," he said. The last rain had been the evening before. That was 12 hours ago. Sitting on an eagle tail looked out over the ridge. The morning light was fully up now, and the trees stretched east toward the Cohutta Wilderness in a rolling ocean of green and rust that seemed to move even when the wind was still. He spoke, and he did not seem to be speaking to me. "He knows we came." "How does he know?" I asked. "Because he was here," sitting on an eagle tail said. "He was here when the first man went missing. He was here when the second one went missing. He was here when the third one went missing. He was here at the observation deck this morning, and he was watching you the same way he watched us drive up the road. He knew we came because he watched us come." Bearchild said something in a language I did not know. Sitting on an eagle tail nodded without looking at him. "The boy is right," he said. "This one is not like the ones back home. This one is older, and this one is not alone." Something in the way he said "not alone" made the skin at the back of my neck lift. Running Antelope stepped forward and set down her leather bundle. She unwrapped it with slow hands. Inside was a folded piece of hide, painted in deep red and ochre with figures I could not immediately understand. Tall shapes, rounded shoulders, long arms, faces that were not quite faces. She spread the hide across the ground beside the footprint, and sitting on an eagle tail crouched over it and pointed with a finger that did not tremble. "This one," he said, tapping a figure with a heavy brow and a stooped posture. "This is what walked here last night." "That is not," I began. And then I did not finish, because I did not know how to finish. I was going to say that is not possible. I was going to say that is a myth. I was going to say something the government told me to say when tourists asked about the things that go missing in these mountains. But the print was in front of me. The print was real. The print was still holding water at its edges. And the woman with the hide was looking at me with something like patience, The way you look at a child who is about to be told something he should have been told a long time ago. You know what we call them, sitting on an eagle tail said. Your people have their own name. Some call them one thing, some call them another. It does not matter what you call them. What matters is that this one has been fed. Fed? Crowfoot spoke for the first time. His voice was deeper than a well. When they take a person and are not driven off, they learn. They learn that the taking works. They learn that no one comes. Each one that is not driven off becomes bolder. This one has been taking people for a long time. This one has been left alone. This one has come to believe the mountain belongs to him. Does it not? I said. And I meant it as a joke, but it did not come out that way. Sitting on an eagle tail did not answer me. He rolled up the hide and handed it back to Running Antelope. He stood. We will camp near where the second one was taken, he said. The tent site off the hike-in trail. We will make our camp there and wait. Wait for what? He looked at me. His face was very still. For him to come see us. Before you go any further into these woods with me, I need to ask you something. If you are listening to this story right now, and you have not yet hit the subscribe button, or the like button, or dropped a comment down below telling me what you think, please do that now, because the algorithm is the only thing that decides whether stories like this one get to reach the ears of people like you. It costs you nothing. It means everything to me. Now come back into the trees with us. We made camp at 3:15 in the afternoon on a flat piece of ground about 100 yards off the hike-in trail, above a small creek that had no name on my map. The site was where a man named Owen Pedra had pitched his tent 8 nights before. Owen Pedra had been 34 years old, a hospital administrator out of Chattanooga, a section hiker 200 miles into a planned 1,000-mile summer. His tent had been found by a passing hiker at daybreak. The zipper had been open. The sleeping bag inside had been undisturbed. His pack, his boots, his cook kit, his food bag hung 10 feet up in a nearby tree, all still in place. His wallet was in the tent, in a plastic sleeve, on top of a paperback copy of a book he had been reading. There was no blood. There was no sign of a struggle. There was no trail leading away in any direction. There had been, however, one thing that was not right about the tent site. A ring of stones, not a fire ring. A ring of stones set out about 20 feet from the tent, each stone roughly the size of a softball, evenly spaced, going all the way around the tent in a rough circle. My people had not put them there. Owen Piedra had not put them there. Whoever had put them there while Owen Piedra slept. The stones were still there when we arrived. Somebody had walked around them and photographed them and marked them with little flags, but nobody had disturbed them. Sitting on an eagle tail, walked to the ring and knelt down beside one of the stones. He picked it up. He held it in his hand. He put it down exactly where it had been. He made a circle, the elder said. What does that mean? It means he was thinking. It means he was interested. It means he stood outside the tent for a long time and decided what to do next. And when he had decided, he did it, and he took the man. The circle is what he did while he was thinking. Running Antelope was already unpacking. Bearchild was gathering firewood. Never Comes to Think was walking a slow perimeter around the campsite with his eyes on the ground. Crowfoot had climbed a low rise and was looking east. Sitting on an eagle tail stood. He turned to face me. You should decide now if you are staying, he said. I have to stay, I said. I am your liaison. I did not ask you what your paperwork said. I asked if you were staying. I thought about the observation deck at 4 in the morning. I thought about the 11 minutes of feeling watched. I thought about the print in the mud and how deep it had sunk. I thought about the ring of stones. I thought about my daughter, Ellie, in her freshman year at UGA, who had asked me over the phone last week if I was eating enough. I thought about my ex-wife, Marta, who had told me on the day the papers were signed that I loved the mountains more than I had ever loved her, and that this was the only true thing about me she had ever known. I am staying, I said. Sitting on an eagle tail nodded once. Then we begin. The elders had a way of settling into a place that did not look like they were doing anything at all. Sitting on an eagle tail sat on a fallen hemlock at the edge of camp, wrapped in a wool blanket that had seen more winters than I had, and simply watched. Running Antelope opened her bundle again and laid out a small, private altar of pipestone and cedar. She did not perform any ceremony that I could recognize. She just arranged things. She made the ground around her a place that was hers. Never comes to think. And Crowfoot moved into the trees and did not come back for 2 hours. When they came back, they brought 2 more people with them. I had not known there were more people in the woods. I had not known anyone else had come. "This is Red Crow," sitting on an eagle tail said, without getting up. A man of about 60, with a face that had been broken at least twice by something heavier than a fist. "And this is Bull Shield, a younger man, maybe 40, thick through the shoulders like a boxer who had gone up 2 weight classes and never lost a step." "Where did they come from?" I asked, because I had to say something. "They came in from the north yesterday," sitting on an eagle tail said. "They walked from the Blue Ridge Parkway. That is more than 50 miles. "They walked," he said. Red Crow set down his pack and did not look at me. Bull Shield did look at me, and his look was one I did not like at all. It was not hostile, it was appraising. He was measuring how much of a problem I was going to be. "He was drinking last night," Bull Shield said. Not to me, but to the elder. I opened my mouth to say something and closed it again. I had not been drinking. I had not had a drink in 9 months and 11 days. My last drink had been on the anniversary of the divorce, alone in my cabin, and I had thrown up the bourbon before it hit my bloodstream, and I had promised myself I was done. I was done. But I understood, after a second, that Bull Shield had not meant me at all. Sitting on an eagle tail was already answering him. "How much?" "Enough to make him slow." "How far?" 2 miles, southeast, in a hollow with a spring in it. I stared at them. "Are you telling me you can smell that from where you were?" Bull Shield turned his face toward me. His nostrils flared once. It was such a small movement, and yet it was such an old movement, and I understood in that moment that whatever these people were, they were not what the paperwork my supervisor had given me suggested they were. They were something older than paperwork. "I did not smell it," Bull Shield said. "I saw it." "You saw the drinking?" "I saw where he pissed against a stump," he said. "The color was wrong. The smell of the piss was wrong. He is old and his liver is bad. And there were 3 empty cans in a bush 30 yards from the stump. He did not carry them out. He was clumsy. That is drinking." I did not know what to say to that. Crowfoot spoke up. He had been silent for most of the day, and when he spoke slowly, as if he were choosing each word from a shelf of possible words. "He is not alone in the hollow. There are 2 others with him. One small. A woman maybe, one large. Also a man. They do not know he is there." Sitting on an eagle tail nodded slowly. "He does not want them," the elder said. "He wants us." The team fell silent. I felt the silence like a change in air pressure. Somewhere down the ridge a woodpecker began hammering into a dead trunk, and the sound was so loud in the stillness that I flinched. "What do you mean he wants us?" I said. Sitting on an eagle tail did not answer. Running Antelope did. "He has been listening to us since we arrived," the old woman said. She did not stop what she was doing at her small altar. "He has been standing in the trees on the west side of the creek since we made camp. When Bull Shield and Red Crow came in from the north, he went that way. When they came back with us, he came back with them. He does not want the hunters in the hollow. He wants us. He wants sitting on an eagle tail. He has known sitting on an eagle tail was coming since the first man went missing." I said. "Since 11 days ago?" "Yes." "How?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were black and had no bottom. "He was told." "By whom?" She looked down again. "By the other one." Sitting on an eagle tail rose to his feet, and something in the way he rose made me understand that until that moment he had been resting and that he was not resting anymore. He walked away from the campsite, slowly, out along the edge of the tree line, and stopped where the ground began to fall away toward the creek. He stood there for perhaps 5 minutes without moving. Then he came back. "We will not stay here tonight," he said. "Where will we go?" I asked. "We will go up to the top of the falls. We will make our camp there. He will follow. He has to. That is where his food is." I did not understand any of that. His food. The falls, sitting on an eagle tail, said. The water. He drinks from the pool at the top. That is why he stays in this park. There are 2 other places on the ridge where he drinks, but the pool at the top is his best place. He will not let us camp there. He will come. You want him to come? The elder looked at me with his old, quiet eyes. I want him to think he has to come. There is a difference. A creature that comes because he is angry is a creature that makes mistakes. A creature that comes because he chose to come does not. We broke camp faster than I would have believed possible. 10 people, or however many of them there actually were, and I still had not gotten a firm count, all moving with the smooth economy of a team that had done this many times. Bearchild rolled the sleeping mats. Running Antelope wrapped her altar. Never Comes to Think and Crowfoot went ahead as scouts. Bullshield and Red Crow flanked our small column at either side. Sitting on an eagle tail walked in the middle, and I walked beside him. Tell me about the other one, I said, as we climbed. He was quiet a long time. There are 2, he said finally. In these mountains, there have always been 2. They are old and they are mates. The male has been the one taking your hikers. The female has been quiet. She has stayed high. She has stayed in the deep gorge above the falls, where nobody goes. Nobody has ever reported. Nobody has ever reported because nobody who has seen her has ever come back to make a report, he said. The male takes and lets the person be found. The female takes and does not let anything be found. Do you understand the difference? I did not answer him. I did not need to. We reached the top of the falls just before dusk. The pool at the top of Amicalola is not a large pool. The stream comes down through a series of granite steps and gathers in a basin about the size of a 2-car garage before spilling over the lip and beginning the long descent into the gorge. The observation deck is 30 yards downstream from the basin. There is a metal railing along the deck and a wooden staircase down to the parking lot. I had stood on that deck 1,000 times. I had never stood on it, and felt what I felt when I stood on it that evening. The air over the pool was still. There was no evening breeze. There were no birds. There were no insects. The waterfall itself made its usual sound, but the sound seemed to come from farther away than it should have, as if the whole scene were being played back to me through a speaker on the other side of a room. Sitting on an eagle tail walked to the edge of the pool. He knelt down. He put both hands flat on the wet stone at the water's edge. He said something under his breath in a language I did not know. Then he stood up and turned to the team. He is close, he said. He will come tonight. I have spent many nights in these woods. I have spent nights alone during snow squalls when the temperature dropped into the single digits. I have spent nights sitting up with lost tourists who had broken ankles and were trying not to panic while I waited for the litter team to come up the switchbacks with lights on their helmets. I have spent nights during summer thunderstorms with lightning walking down the ridge in front of me. I thought I knew what a long night in the mountains was. I did not know. The team set the camp in a rough horseshoe around the pool at the top of the falls. Sitting on an eagle tail, sat with his back to a hemlock and did not move. Running Antelope sat with him. Bearchild was placed inside the horseshoe, closest to the elder, and told to stay where he was. Never Comes to Think, Crowfoot, Red Crow, and Bullshield spread out to the edges. Never Comes to Think had his rifle across his knees. The others carried different things. Red Crow had a heavy knife the length of my forearm. Crowfoot had a pouch on his belt that made a sound like small bones when he moved. Bullshield had nothing in his hands at all, and I understood after watching him for an hour that he did not need anything in his hands. I was placed beside sitting on an eagle tail because he did not want me at the perimeter. I had my sidearm and my radio and a headlamp I had not turned on, and I felt like a Boy Scout at a war council. Around 8:30, the last of the evening light bled out of the sky. The moon had not yet risen. There was a low ground fog that had come up out of the gorge over the last hour, and now sat around our knees like a slow river. The waterfall behind us kept up its steady voice. Otherwise, the woods were silent. At 9:04, my radio hissed. Not static, a hiss. Long and deliberate, and coming from the speaker on my belt, but not with any pattern of static I had ever heard from any handheld I had ever owned. I lifted the radio off my belt slowly. The screen was dark. The unit was off. I had turned it off before we set the camp because Sitting on an Eagle Tail had asked me to, but the speaker was hissing. Sitting on an Eagle Tail did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the tree line across the pool. "He is testing you," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear him. "Do not answer. Do not touch the buttons. Put it back." I put the radio back on my belt. The hissing stopped. At 9:17, a woman spoke my name. Not from the tree line, not from the pool, from inside my own ear, as if she were sitting on my shoulder and had leaned close. It was Marta's voice, my ex-wife. The last time I had heard her voice had been over the phone when she called to tell me her father had died 3 years before. She had said, in that call, "Henry, Henry, are you there?" And now, at 9:17 at night at the top of Amicalola Falls, I heard her say, "Henry, Henry, are you there?" Word for word, tone for tone. The little catch on the second Henry, the way her voice always cracked when she was trying not to cry. I stood up. Sitting on an Eagle Tail's hand was on my wrist before I had taken a full breath. His grip was not hard. It did not have to be. Whatever else he was a man who had spent his whole life being obeyed by his own body, and his hand on my wrist felt like the mountain telling me to sit down. "That is not her voice," he said. I heard her. "It is not her voice. It is his voice. He has been in these mountains a long time. He collects. He carries them in his throat like a bird carries the songs of other birds. Sit down. Do not answer. If you answer, he learns the shape of your voice. And if he learns the shape of your voice, he can use it later on someone who loves you. Sit down." I sat down. At 9:41, Bearchild began to cry very quietly. He did not make any noise, but the tears ran down his cheeks in a steady stream, and his shoulders shook. Running Antelope put her hand on the back of his neck and left it there. She did not comfort him. She did not tell him it was going to be all right. She just kept her hand there. I understood, from watching her, that this was part of how the boy was being taught. He was being taught to feel the fear. He was being taught to sit inside it and not let it move him. That was the lesson. At 10 past 10, the fog around our knees rose up to our chests. I had never seen fog do that. I had seen fog thicken, and I had seen fog roll, and I had seen fog lift and burn off. I had never seen fog rise straight up in the air like water poured into a basin. But that is what this fog did. It came up around us in a smooth, slow tide, until my chin was above it, and I could see nothing below my chin. Sitting on an Eagle Tail was fully invisible. I could hear him breathing beside me. I could not see him. Something moved through the fog on the far side of the pool. It was very large. It was tall enough that the top of it stood above the fog line. I saw it against the black shape of the trees at the pool's edge. I saw the head. The head was not right. It was too far forward on the shoulders. The shoulders were too high and too far apart. The head turned. It turned the way a person's head turns when they hear a sound they cannot quite place. And then, from the fog, above the fog, from that face I could not see clearly and did not want to see clearly, came a sound. It was a woman's laugh. It was Marta's laugh. It was the laugh she had made the first time we camped together, at 23 years old, when I had put my hand on her cheek in the tent and she had laughed because she had not expected me to, because she had thought I was going to say something ordinary, and instead I had touched her face. It was that laugh, exactly. It was that laugh, at 10 past 10 at night, coming out of a mouth that was 10 feet in the air and 40 feet away from me, across a pool of very cold and very still water. I did not move. I do not know how I did not move. I do not know how any part of me stayed still while my whole body was screaming to run. But sitting on an Eagle Tail's hand had never left my wrist, and the pressure of his hand was the anchor that kept me on the ground. The laugh ended. The head above the fog line turned, and then it was gone. I do not mean that it walked away. I do not mean that it stepped back into the trees. I mean that it was there, and then it was not there, and there was no sound of anything walking anywhere. It was the absence of it that was worst. It was the way the fog closed over where the head had been, and then a moment later the fog began to slowly recede back down toward our knees, as if some pressure that had been holding it up had gone. At 10:31, sitting on an Eagle Tail released my wrist. "Now you understand," he said very softly. Understand what? I whispered. That he did not come to hurt you. He came to look at you. And what he looked at, he learned. You will hear that laugh again. He will use it. He will use it on you when you are alone. He will use it to bring you outside your cabin at 3 in the morning. You must not go outside your cabin at 3 in the morning. You must never open the door. Do you hear me? I heard him. Do you hear me? He said again. I hear you. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, there is one more of us coming tonight. I did not tell you before because I did not want you to hope. But she is coming, and she will be here before dawn. Her name is Seen from Afar. She is my oldest sister, and she is the only one of us who has ever seen the female of the pair up close and lived. She is coming because we cannot deal with the male until she has told us where the female is. She is coming here? In the middle of the night? Alone? Sitting on an eagle tail smiled for the first time since I had met him. It was a small smile, and it was tired, and it did not have any humor in it. She is 81 years old, he said. She has been coming here alone since before you were born. She does not need our help. At 3 in the morning, Seen from Afar walked into our camp. I did not hear her come. I did not see her come. One moment she was not there. The next moment she was standing at the edge of the horseshoe of our camp, with a wool shawl over her shoulders and a stick in her hand and moccasins on her feet, breathing evenly. Nobody had reacted to her arrival. Nobody startled. She had crossed some distance from wherever she had come from, and had walked into the middle of us like a woman coming home from a neighbor's house. She looked at Sitting on an Eagle Tail. She looked at me. She looked at Bearchild, who was asleep now against Running Antelope's shoulder. She looked past all of us, up the ridge, north, toward the gorge above the falls. She is in the gorge, Seen from Afar said. She is waiting for us. How far? The elder asked. 2 miles, maybe less. She has moved since I saw her. When did you see her? An hour ago. How close? Seen from Afar looked down at her hands. There was something in her right hand, something I had not seen at first. A piece of long black hair, coarse and thick, 6 inches long. She held it up. This close, she said. We moved out of the camp before the first light. Seen from Afar led. Sitting on an eagle tail, walked directly behind her. The rest of us fell into a column with the same discipline as before, except that this time nobody spoke, and this time everybody carried their tool of choice in their hand, not on their belt. I had never been in the gorge above the falls at night. Almost nobody had. The gorge is a place the state park does not encourage visits to. There are no trails up there. There is a wildlife management boundary that curves around it, and beyond that, the ground falls away in a series of vertical rock faces that are technically climbable, but that nobody climbs. The topo maps show a long, twisting canyon threading north for about 3 miles before it opens out into a bowl of granite and hardwood that has no road access, and no trailhead, and no reason for anyone to be in it. We were in it by 4:30. Seen from Afar stopped at the mouth of a smaller side gorge, one that I would have walked past 100 times without noticing. She pointed with her stick. Sitting on an eagle tail said something to Never Comes to Think, and Never Comes to Think broke off from the column and went east along the ridgeline above us. Bullshield and Red Crow went west. Crowfoot stayed with the elder. Running Antelope, Bearchild, Seen from Afar, and I stayed in the middle. There was a body ahead of us. I did not see it at first. Seen from Afar walked us up to it slowly and stopped 6 feet away from it and let me look. It was a man. He was seated with his back against a large stone. His eyes were open, his clothes were still on, his hiking boots were still laced. He was very pale, and there was ice in his beard, and he had been dead for at least a night. He was not one of the 3 that had gone missing from our park. He was somebody else. He was somebody nobody had known was here. Starving Bull, Seen from Afar said, her voice completely without inflection. I looked at her. This was one of your people? She did not answer me. She looked at Sitting on an Eagle Tail. Sitting on an Eagle Tail knelt beside the body. He put his hand on the dead man's shoulder. He held it there. He came out 3 weeks ago, the elder said. He came out ahead of us to scout. He was one of the best of us. He was in his prime. He was not answering our radio calls after the first 4 days. He is the reason we are here. Not your hikers, him. He was our brother. I understood then what I had not understood before. This was not a federal search and rescue call. This was not a cultural exchange program. My supervisor had lied to me, or he had been lied to. The Blackfeet team was here because their scout had gone silent in these mountains, and they had come to bring him back, one way or another. My missing hikers were only the cover story that made the federal side of the paperwork move. Bull Shield came back from the west. He was carrying something in his hand. He set it on the ground next to, sitting on an eagle tail without a word. It was another piece of the long black hair. Sitting on an eagle tail rose to his feet. His face had changed. Some patience that had been in it for the last 24 hours had gone out. He looked at seen from afar. Where? Up the smaller gorge. There is a place where the walls close in and the ground is dry. She has made a nest there. I did not go all the way in. I did not want her to know I had seen the whole thing. How many? 2. The male has come to her in the night. He is with her now. They have not moved. He looked around at all of us. We are going to end this today, he said. It cannot be left. If we leave it, more of your hikers will go. More of your rangers will go. More of my people will come and go. This will not stop until they are stopped. Do you understand what I am telling you? I understood. There is one more thing, seen from afar said. There is a shape in the nest that is not either of them. There is a shape that is smaller. There is a young one. The silence that followed those words was the longest of the night. A young one, sitting on an eagle tail, said. Yes. He was very still. We will not harm the young one, he said finally. We will do what has to be done to the 2 old ones, and we will let the young one go. It is not old enough to have taken anyone. It has learned nothing yet. If we harm it, we become the same thing as them. We do not become the same thing as them. Do all of you hear me? He looked at each one of us in turn. Bull Shield's face did not move. Red Crow's face did not move. Crowfoot nodded, very slightly. Running Antelope nodded. Bearchild nodded, though his eyes were on the ground. Seen from afar, closed her eyes, and did not open them again for a long moment. He looked at me last. You will stay here with the body, he said. You will not follow. If any of us come running back down this gorge with something coming behind us, you will run. You will run down the way we came, and you will not stop, and you will not look back, and you will not be caught. Do you understand? I did not want to stay with the body. I did not want to be alone in the gorge in the fog with a dead man and a piece of long black hair on the ground beside him. But I understood that the request had nothing to do with what I wanted. I understand, I said. They left. All of them. They walked up into the smaller gorge single file, and the fog closed behind them, and I was alone. I sat down beside Starving Bull. He was cold. His hands were folded in his lap. There was a small leather pouch on a cord around his neck, and it had not been taken. I did not open it. It was not mine to open. I sat with him and waited and watched the light of the coming morning turn the fog from black to gray to something that was almost silver, and I listened as hard as I have ever listened for anything. For a very long time I heard nothing. Then, from up the smaller gorge, I heard a single shot. Then I heard a scream. The scream was not human. It came again, and again, and again, in a long series that seemed to fill up the whole gorge and press outward against the rock walls. And I found that my hands were on my sidearm, and I did not remember drawing it. I stood up. I looked up the gorge into the fog. I did not move toward it. I did not move away from it. I stood beside Starving Bull's body, and I held my sidearm, and I listened to a mountain die. Then the scream stopped. Silence. I counted to 30, to 60, to 120. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. The fog had begun to lift, and I could see the shape of the smaller gorge rising away from me now. Walls of granite, a fringe of hemlocks at the top. At 6:04 in the morning, sitting on an eagle tail, walked out of the gorge alone. He was walking with a slight limp. His coat had blood on it that was not his. His face was old. He looked at me from 20 feet away and did not smile, and did not nod, and did not speak. He kept walking, past me, past Starving Bull, back down toward the falls. I called after him. "Where are the others?" He did not turn around. "They are coming," he said. They came, but not all of them. Bull Shield came down the gorge next, half carrying and half dragging Red Crow, who had a wound in his side that was bleeding through Bull Shield's hand where he pressed against it. Crowfoot came behind them with a rifle that was not his own, and a look on his face that had been carved out of stone. Running Antelope came behind them, walking upright, but she was crying. Bearchild walked beside her, and one of his sleeves was torn open, and he was carrying, wrapped in his coat, something small that was covered in that same coarse black hair. Never Comes to Think did not come down the gorge. Neither did Seen from Afar. Sitting on an eagle tail had already begun making arrangements. He did not tell me what had happened. He did not tell me who had died. He did not tell me what had been done to the young one, or where they were leaving the bodies of the two old ones. He asked me to call in a helicopter for Red Crow, and he asked me to call it in as a hunter with an accidental discharge, and he asked me to keep everything else off the radio and off the paperwork forever. I did what he asked. The chopper came in on the state park meadow at 8:15. The pilot did not ask questions he did not want the answers to. Red Crow was loaded on a litter and flown out to Northeast Georgia Medical Center in Gainesville, where he would recover over the course of 6 weeks and never speak to me again. Bull Shield left with the chopper. Crowfoot stayed. Running Antelope stayed. Bearchild stayed. Sitting on an eagle tail stayed. The thing Bearchild had wrapped in his coat did not stay. I was told, 3 days later, that it had been driven back to Montana in the back of the second truck. I was told that a place had been prepared for it. I was told that it was young enough to be taught. I was told nothing else. I did not ask. I have thought about it every night since. We searched the area of the smaller gorge for 3 days. We did not find the bodies of Never Comes to Think or Seen from Afar. We did not find the bodies of the two old ones. We did not find any physical evidence at all that anything had ever happened in that gorge. Whatever was there had been removed by hands more careful than any I had ever known. When I stood in the nest, when I walked over the dry ground and looked at the walls of stone that closed around it, I could feel that something had been there. I could feel the shape of it. But there was nothing to point to. There was no proof. There was only me, and sitting on an eagle tail, and the mountain. I filed a report on the missing hikers. My report said that we had found no sign of them, and that the investigation had been closed pending further leads. My supervisor did not question the report. He knew, I think, that he was not supposed to. The Interior Department did not ask any follow-up questions. The paperwork was clean. The paperwork is always clean. On the last day, before sitting on an eagle tail left, we walked up to the top of the falls together. He stood at the edge of the pool and looked down at the water, and I stood beside him. 2 things, he said. Yes. The first thing, you will hear that laugh again. You will hear other voices, voices you know, voices you love. He is dead, but the sound of him is not dead because you carried it out of the mountains with you when you followed us. He got into your ear and left something of himself in it. You are going to hear it again. It will come at night. It will come when you are alone. It will try to move you. You must not move. I understand. The second thing, there will be another one someday. There is always another one. Not soon, not in the next year, not in the next 10 years. But someday, another one will come into these mountains. It will hear the story of what happened to the two old ones, and it will be curious, and it will come. When it comes, you must call me. If I am dead, you must call whoever has taken my place. Do not try to handle it yourself. Do you hear me? I hear you. Good. He turned to leave. He stopped and turned back. There is a third thing, he said. It is smaller than the first 2, but I want you to know it. Yes. When we found the body of my brother, Starving Bull, he was sitting against the stone with his eyes open. He was not put there. He walked to that stone by himself and he sat down and he died. He did that because he knew he was too weak to make it back to us, and he did not want the old male to have his body. He carried a small stone in his mouth, sitting under his tongue. It was a piece of the pool at the top of the falls. He must have carried it up from here, up into the gorge, all those weeks ago. He knew he might not come back. He wanted us to know he had been here. He paused. There is a place near the entrance to the park, he said. A little turn off the main road, where the trees are all standing very close together, and there is one old stump right at the center of them. Do you know the place? I did. It was an unofficial pull-off. Nobody used it. Locals called it, without knowing why they called it that, the stump. Yes, I said. I know the place. Go there tonight, he said. After you have finished your paperwork, go there just before sunset. Put your hand on the stump. Say the name of my brother in your mouth. That is all. You do not need to say anything else. Just put your hand on the stump and say the name. Why the stump? He looked at me a long time. It is where the old ones used to gather, he said, long before your people were here. Long before my people were here. They used to gather at that stump and speak to each other. It is a good place. It has memory. My brother's name will find its way to him there. I did what he asked. I have done it every year since. I go to the stump at the end of my ranger season, in the last week of October when the light is thin and yellow, and I put my hand on the wood, and I say the names. Starving Bull, Never Comes to Think, seen from afar, Owen Piedra, the hospital administrator whose tent was still zipped. The others, all of them, I say them out loud, one at a time, into the quiet trees, and I do not hurry. And I listen. Some years I hear nothing. Some years I hear something. Up on the ridge, a long way off, that might be an animal, or might be a bird, or might be the wind, or might be something else. 1 year, 3 years ago, I heard my ex-wife's laugh. I did not turn my head. I finished saying the names. I walked back to my truck. I went home. That is the story of what happened in the Amicalola Gorge in the fall of the year the Blackfeet team came to my park. I have never told it before. I am telling it now because I am 52 years old, and the last of the memories I trust is the memory of the elder standing at the pool with his old tired eyes. And I want the memory to live in someone else's head besides mine. So, if you have listened this far, thank you. If you feel a small cold thing in the middle of your chest right now, that is the memory taking root. Water it. Do not let it die. Tell it to someone. Tell it to your children when they are old enough to hear it. Tell it to the person you love in a whisper, in the quiet, in bed. And if you are ever driving through North Georgia on a fall evening, and you pass a state park sign that points up a switchback road toward a waterfall you have never heard of before, and you feel some small hand of curiosity turn you toward that road, I ask you this one thing. Roll up your windows. Do not slow down. Keep driving. The mountain is old, and the mountain remembers, and there is one place near the entrance of that park where the trees stand very close together and there is a stump at the center of them, and the old ones gather there still. You do not want to hear your own voice come back to you from it. If this story kept you with me, please leave a like, drop a subscribe, and tell me down in the comments what part of these mountains scared you the most. I read every one, and I will see you again on the next long walk, when the light gets thin and the trees begin to lean in close. Three words had been carved into the trunk of a 200-year-old oak near the summit of Old Rag Mountain. 3 words in a language that had no business being scratched into any tree in any forest in any corner of Virginia. I stood there tracing the grooves with my fingertips while the last of the evening light bled out of the sky, and the entire mountain went silent around me. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums like deep water. The kind that makes you realize every sound you have ever taken for granted. The wind, the insects, the birds, all of it, was a thin wall between you and something unbearable. I had been a ranger in the Shenandoah region for 11 years. I had seen bears stand on their hind legs and stare at me from 30 feet away. I had pulled hikers off cliffs after they slipped on ice that formed overnight. I had recovered bodies from ravines so steep that the rescue teams needed 3 anchors and a full day to bring them out. None of that prepared me for the summer I spent on Old Rag Mountain. None of that came close. It started in early June when Folsom, my senior partner at the Old Rag Ranger Station, dropped a manila folder on my desk without saying a word. Folsom was a quiet man by nature, a ranger of 23 years who had earned his silence the hard way. But that morning his jaw was set in a way I had never seen. He tapped the folder twice with his index finger and walked out of the room. Inside were 4 missing person reports filed over a span of 9 days. 4 hikers, all experienced, all carrying GPS devices and satellite communicators, had vanished on the same stretch of trail between the rock scramble and the summit. The first was a retired Marine from Charlottesville who had hiked Old Rag more than 60 times. The second was a graduate student from UVA who specialized in Appalachian geology. The third and fourth were a married couple from Richmond who had been members of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club for over a decade. All of them had checked in at the lower parking area. All of them had been spotted by other hikers on the way up, and all of them had simply stopped existing somewhere between the false summit and the true peak. No distress signals, no abandoned gear, no blood, no drag marks, no signs of animal predation, just absence. I read through each report twice, and then I read them again. The only commonality beyond the trail segment was a detail buried in the witness statements. 3 separate groups of hikers had reported hearing something moving through the trees above the scramble. Something heavy, something that displaced branches and sent loose stones tumbling down the granite face. One witness described the sound as rhythmic, like footsteps, but spaced too far apart for any human stride. Another said she had smelled something so foul that she had gagged and nearly lost her footing on the rock face. A smell like rotting meat mixed with wet earth and something else. Something chemical and sharp, like copper left out in the rain. Folsom came back into the office an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of me and sat on the edge of his desk. "I know what you are thinking," he said, "and I thought the same thing. But I have been on this mountain for a long time, and I am telling you right now that what is happening up there is not bears, not cougars, and not some group of lost hikers who wandered off trail." "Then what is it?" I asked. Folsom stared out the window at the ridgeline. The granite spine of Old Rag caught the morning light and held it, glowing pale against the blue sky. "There is a man I want you to meet," he said. "His name is Greenwood LaFleur. He lives on the eastern side of the mountain near the old fire road. He is the last person alive who might be able to tell you what those carvings on the summit oak actually say." I did not ask Folsom how he knew about the carvings. I did not ask him why he had not mentioned them before. Something in his voice told me that the time for questions had not yet arrived, and that the answers, when they came, would not be the kind I wanted to hear. I drove out that afternoon. The fire road was barely a road at all. Just 2 ruts cut through rhododendron thickets so dense that the branches scraped both sides of my truck. The canopy closed overhead like a tunnel, and the light took on a greenish quality, filtered and strange, as if I were driving underwater. After 2 miles the road ended at a clearing, where a small cabin sat beneath a stand of hemlocks so tall they seemed to lean against the sky. Greenwood LaFleur was waiting on the porch. He was a man of perhaps 75 years, broad-shouldered despite his age, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a single braid that hung past his shoulder blades. His face was deeply lined, mapped by sun and wind and time, and his eyes were the color of creek water running over deep stone. He did not stand when I parked the truck. He did not wave or call out. He simply watched me approach with the measured patience of someone who had been expecting my arrival for a very long time. "You are the new one," he said. It was not a question. I told him my name and showed him my badge. He glanced at it and looked away. "Folsom sent you because of the hikers," he said, "and because of the tree." "Yes, sir." Greenwood rocked slowly in his chair. The hemlock branches moved above us in a wind I could not feel at ground level, making a sound like whispered conversation. "That tree has been on the summit longer than any living person," he said. "My grandfather, Big LaFleur, told me about those carvings when I was a boy. He said they were put there by Pushmataha himself, a long time before any of us drew breath on this earth. Pushmataha was a war chief, a man of terrible courage and vision. He led our people through seasons of blood that I hope you can never imagine. But even Pushmataha was afraid of what lives in the granite. Even he carved his warning and walked away." I asked Greenwood what the carving said. He looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then he said a word in his language, and the sound of it made the skin on the back of my neck tighten. It means the one who walks without ending, he said. Pushmataha gave it that name because he saw it cross a ridge at night and it never stopped moving. It walked from one end of the mountain to the other without pause, without rest, without turning. And it was not a man. It was something that wore the shape of a man the way a river wears the shape of the bank it is cutting through. I sat with Greenwood until the light faded and the first stars appeared above the hemlocks. He told me about Mushulatubi, a war leader of the old days who had organized hunting parties to track the creature through the high country. Mushulatubi was a man who feared nothing that bled, but the thing on Old Rag did not bleed. It left footprints in the mud that measured nearly 20 inches from heel to toe. It bent young trees to the ground as it passed, and it smelled of death and copper and something else, something that Mushulatubi said reminded him of the way the air tastes before a lightning strike. None of his hunting parties ever found it, Greenwood said, but it found 2 of them. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Folsom and I went up the mountain the next morning. We took the ridge trail from the lower lot, moving fast through the lower switchbacks where the oaks and hickories grew thick and the trail was still civilized, still marked with blue blazes and maintained by volunteer crews. But above 3,000 feet the character of Old Rag changed. The trees thinned. The soil gave way to exposed granite, slick with lichen and morning moisture, and the trail became a series of hand-over-hand scrambles through gaps in massive boulders that had been piled there by glaciers 10,000 years before. I had climbed Old Rag dozens of times. I knew every chimney, every squeeze, every ledge where you had to press your back against one wall and your boots against the other and inch yourself upward. But that morning the mountain felt different. The granite seemed to radiate a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, a kind of mineral hostility, as if the stone itself resented our presence. We reached the false summit by 9 and the true peak by 9:30. The old oak stood alone in a small depression below the summit cairn, twisted and wind-battered but alive, its roots gripping the rock like the fingers of a hand refusing to let go. The carvings were on the north face of the trunk, about 4 feet off the ground. 3 characters cut deep into wood that had grown around them for centuries. Folsom traced them with his finger. "You showed these to Greenwood," he said. "Yesterday." "And what did he tell you?" I repeated what Greenwood had said about Pushmataha and the name and the thing that walked without stopping. Folsom nodded slowly. He pulled a folded topographic map from his vest pocket and spread it on a flat rock. He had marked it with red circles, each one corresponding to the last known position of a missing hiker. The circles formed a rough arc along the northeast face of the summit ridge, a crescent shape that curved from the scramble section to a point about half a mile below the peak. I noticed something else on the map. Blue triangles, older marks, some of them faded almost to invisibility. "Those are mine," Folsom said. "Every sighting report I have collected in 23 years. Sounds, smells, visual contacts, all of them. And they all cluster in the same arc." "How many?" I asked. Folsom folded the map. 47, he said. "And those are just the ones people were willing to report." We spent the rest of the morning searching the summit area. I found nothing unusual except a section of ground cover, mountain laurel, and blueberry bushes that had been flattened in a path roughly 4 feet wide. The vegetation was not just bent but crushed, pressed flat against the rock with a force that had split woody stems as thick as my thumb. The path ran north to south for about 60 yards, and then simply ended at a granite ledge overlooking a 200-foot drop into the hollow below. Whatever had made that path had either stopped at the edge or gone over it. I leaned out and looked down. There was nothing on the rocks below, except shadow and the tops of the trees growing out of the crevices. If you have been watching this, and you have not yet liked this video or left a comment or subscribed to this channel, I need you to do that right now. Just take a moment. It helps more than you know. Because the story I am about to tell you does not get easier from here. We came down off the mountain in the early afternoon and drove to the home of Peter Perkins Pitchlin, a tribal elder and historian who lived in a farmhouse on the western slope of the Blue Ridge about 15 miles from Old Rag. Peter was a tall man, thin and precise in his movements, with reading glasses perched on his forehead and ink stains on his fingers. His kitchen table was covered with maps, photocopied land records, and handwritten journals bound in leather. Peter's younger brother, Jack Pitchlynn, was there as well. Jack was broader than Peter, heavier through the shoulders, with a watchful quality about him that reminded me of certain combat veterans I had known. He did not shake my hand when Peter introduced us. He simply nodded and stepped back against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed. Folsom told Peter about the missing hikers and about the carvings on the summit oak. Peter listened without interruption, turning a pencil slowly between his fingers. When Folsom finished, Peter removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You know what Greenwood told him," Peter said, gesturing at me. "And you know what I am going to say." "I know," Folsom said. "But he needs to hear it from someone who has studied the records." Peter opened one of the leather journals. The pages were filled with handwriting in two languages, English and a script I did not recognize. "This belonged to a Pukshanubi," Peter said. "He was a district chief in the old days, a man of considerable education and spiritual authority. He kept records of everything: crop yields, treaty negotiations, weather patterns, and he kept records of encounters with the being on the mountain." Peter turned to a page near the middle of the journal. The handwriting here was smaller, more cramped, as though the writer had been hurrying or agitated. "A Pukshanubi describes a creature that stands between 7 and 9 feet tall," Peter said. "Covered in hair the color of dead leaves. It walks upright but can move on all fours when it needs speed. Its face is broad and flat, almost human but not human, with deep-set eyes that reflect light the way a predator's eyes reflect firelight. It has a smell that a Pukshanubi compares to a corpse left in stagnant water." He looked up at me. "And it is intelligent," he said. "Not animal intelligent. Not the kind of cunning a bear or a wolf possesses. It understands patterns, it watches, it learns the movements of the people who enter its territory, and then it acts." Jack Pitchlynn spoke for the first time. His voice was low and flat. "It took a man named Nitakachi," Jack said. "Summer of 1847. Nitakachi was the best tracker our people ever produced. He could follow a deer across bare stone. He could read a trail 3 days old in dry weather. Our elders sent him up the mountain to find the creature and end it. He went up alone, because he said no one else could move quietly enough." "What happened?" I asked. Jack looked at his brother. Peter closed the journal. "They found his rifle at the base of the north face," Jack said, "bent nearly in half. No other trace of him was ever recovered. The elders declared the north face forbidden ground. That prohibition stood for over a century. Until the Park Service built a trail through it," Folsom said quietly. Peter nodded. "Until the Park Service built a trail through it." That night I could not sleep. I lay in my bunk at the ranger station listening to the sounds of the mountain, the wind in the ridge pines, the distant rush of a creek swollen with June rain, and beneath it all a silence that seemed to press inward from every direction. I kept thinking about Nitakachi, the tracker who had gone up alone and never come back. I kept thinking about his rifle bent nearly in half. What kind of force could do that to a steel barrel? What kind of hands could grip a weapon designed to withstand the repeated explosion of black powder and bend it like a green branch? I got up at 4 in the morning and made coffee in the station kitchen. Folsom was already there, sitting in the gray light with a mug in his hands, staring at nothing. "Greenwood called," he said. "He wants us to come to his place this morning. He says Tunkasila is there." "Who is Tunkasila?" Folsom set his mug down. "Tunkasila is the oldest living member of the tribal community in this region. He is 97 years old and nearly blind. He has not left his home in 6 years. If he traveled to Greenwood's cabin, it is because he has something to say that he considers more important than his own comfort." We drove out to the fire road as the sun was coming up. The morning mist hung in the hollows like smoke from a fire that had burned out in the night, and the ridgeline of old rags stood sharp and clear against a sky that was turning from gray to pale gold. Greenwood's cabin looked the same as before, but there were 2 additional vehicles in the clearing, an old Ford truck with tribal plates and a sedan that I did not recognize. Greenwood met us at the door. His face was drawn, his eyes carrying a weight that had not been there 2 days earlier. "Tunkasila arrived last night," Greenwood said. "He had Big LaFleur drive him. He says the mountain spoke to him. I am not going to tell you what that means because you would not understand it the way it needs to be understood. But I am going to tell you that in all my years I have never known Tunkasila to say something like that, and it frightens me. We went inside. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, heated by a wood stove that ticked softly in the corner. Tunkasila sat in a straight-backed chair near the stove, wrapped in a heavy blanket despite the June warmth. He was the oldest person I had ever seen, his skin thin as paper over bones that seemed too large for the body they supported, his white hair cut short against his skull. His eyes were clouded, the irises ringed with a pale haze, but when he turned his head toward the sound of our entry, there was a sharpness in his expression that had nothing to do with physical sight. Big LaFleur stood behind him. Big LaFleur was aptly named. A man of enormous proportions, well over 6 feet tall, with hands like shovels and a quiet demeanor that belied his size. He was Greenwood's nephew, and he served as Tunkasila's caretaker and driver. He nodded to us and stepped aside. Tunkasila spoke in his language for several minutes. Greenwood translated, pausing between sentences to choose his words carefully. He says the creature on the mountain is not what the outside world thinks it is, Greenwood said. The outside world has given it names. They call it Bigfoot, they call it Sasquatch, they treat it as a curiosity, something to be photographed or debated or turned into entertainment. But our people have known about this being since before any of those names existed, and we know what it truly is. Tunkasila spoke again, his voice rising slightly, and Greenwood's translation became slower, more deliberate. He says it is a guardian that went wrong, a protector that lost the thing it was meant to protect and went mad with the loss. He says Pushmataha understood this, which is why Pushmataha carved the warning instead of trying to kill it. You cannot kill grief, Tunkasila says. You can only give it enough room to walk without harming the living. But it is harming the living, I said. Tunkasila turned his clouded eyes toward me, with an accuracy that should not have been possible for a man of his condition. He spoke a single sentence. Greenwood hesitated before translating. He says the creature has stopped walking, he said. For the first time in all the generations our people have watched it, the creature has stopped walking, and it has begun to wait. I asked what it was waiting for. Tunkasila did not answer. He reached out with one hand and found the edge of the table and gripped it, and I saw that his fingers were trembling. Greenwood looked at Folsom and then at me. He does not know, Greenwood said, and that is what frightens him. We left the cabin an hour later, with a plan that felt inadequate even as we formed it. Folsom would coordinate with the park superintendent to close the summit trail. I would set up trail cameras along the northeast arc, where the sightings and disappearances clustered. Peter Perkins Pitchlin would search the Apukshinabe journals for any description of the creature's behavior when it stopped moving. And Big LaFleur, who knew the mountain as well as any living person, would guide me to the places where the old trails ran, the ones that predated the Park Service by centuries, the ones that Mushulatubi's hunting parties had used. It was not enough. We all knew it was not enough, but it was what we had. Big LaFleur and I went up the mountain the following morning by a route I had never seen. It did not appear on any Park Service map. It began at the end of a logging road that had been abandoned so long ago that the trees growing in its ruts were 60 years old, and it climbed through a section of forest that felt older than anything I had encountered in the Shenandoah. The oaks here were massive, their trunks wider than my arms could span, their canopy so dense that the forest floor was bare except for a carpet of leaves that had been accumulating for centuries. Big LaFleur moved through the trees with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. He placed each foot with deliberation, testing the ground before committing his weight. And he kept his head on a constant swivel, scanning the understory, the canopy, the spaces between the trunks where the shadows gathered like pooled water. "This is the old way," he said. "Mushulatubi's trail. It comes up the back of the mountain, through the drainage that feeds Robinson River. Nobody uses it anymore. Nobody even knows it is here." We climbed for 2 hours through terrain that grew steadily rougher. The trail, if it could be called a trail, was little more than a series of subtle marks on trees, blazes cut so long ago that the bark had nearly swallowed them. Big LaFleur read them like sentences in a book, turning left or right at markers I could not see, crossing a creek at a precise point where flat stones lay just below the surface of the water. At about 3,500 feet, the forest changed. The oaks gave way to a mixed stand of hemlock and yellow birch, and the air took on a smell that I noticed immediately, sharp and metallic, like blood or wet iron. Big LaFleur stopped walking. He stood perfectly still for a long time, his head tilted slightly to one side, listening. "We are in its territory now," he said. "From here up, everything belongs to it." I asked him how he knew. He pointed at a hemlock about 20 feet to our left. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then my eyes adjusted, and I noticed that the bark on one side of the trunk had been stripped away in a pattern of parallel grooves, 5 marks, evenly spaced, cut deep into the wood at a height of about 8 feet off the ground. The exposed wood underneath was pale and dry, which meant the marks were not fresh, but they were unmistakable. "Claw marks," I said. Big LaFleur shook his head. "Not claws, fingers. Look at the spacing. Look at the depth. Those were made by a hand that gripped the tree the way you would grip a fence post and tore downward. And whatever made them was standing flat on the ground when it reached that high." I looked at the marks again. 8 feet. A human being would need to stand on something to reach that height. The creature that had made those marks had been at least 8 feet tall, and strong enough to peel bark from a living hemlock the way I might peel the skin from an orange. We continued climbing. The metallic smell grew stronger. Big LaFleur began pointing out other signs. Broken branches at heights no bear could reach. A section of ground where the leaf litter had been swept clean in a circle perhaps 10 feet across, as if something enormous had bedded down and turned in its sleep. In the center of the circle I found a clump of coarse hair caught on a protruding root. The hair was reddish-brown, about 4 inches long, and coarser than any animal hair I had ever handled. It did not feel like bear hair, or deer hair, or coyote hair. It felt like something between human hair and the bristles on a wire brush. Big LaFleur took the hair from my hand and held it up to the light filtering through the canopy. "Tunkasila told me something when I was young," he said. "He told me that the creature sheds its coat in midsummer the way a snake sheds its skin. He said that in the old days the people would find patches of this hair in the high country, and they would burn it. They believed that burning the shed hair would confuse the creature, make it lose their scent. Mushalatubi insisted on it after the hunting parties were lost." "Did it work?" I asked. Big LaFleur let the hair fall from his fingers. "Mushalatubi survived," he said. "That is all I know." We reached the ridge by noon. The view from the spine of Old Rag was staggering. The Shenandoah Valley spread out to the west like a painting, the Blue Ridge running north and south in waves of green and blue that faded into haze at the horizon, but I could not appreciate it. The metallic smell was overwhelming here, so thick I could taste it on my tongue. And there was a sound, or rather an absence of sound, that was more disturbing than any noise could have been. No birds, no insects, no wind in the grass, just the granite and the sky, and the silence of a place from which every living thing had fled. Big LaFleur crouched and pointed at the ground. There, pressed into a patch of thin soil between 2 slabs of exposed rock, was a footprint. It was enormous, easily 19 inches long and perhaps 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. The toes were distinct, 5 of them, splayed wide, and the depth of the impression told me that whatever had made it carried a weight I could not calculate. 300 pounds at least, perhaps 400. But it was not the size that stopped my breathing. It was the stride. The next print was nearly 5 feet ahead, and the one after that was the same distance again. Whatever had walked across this ridge had been moving with a stride that no human being could match. Not running, not leaping, just walking. Walking the way Pushmataha had described it walking centuries ago. Without pause, without rest, without end. Big LaFleur stood up and looked at me. His face was calm, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "We should go down," he said. "We should not be here when the light changes." I wanted to argue. I wanted to follow the tracks, to set up cameras, to gather evidence. But something in Big LaFleur's voice, and something in the quality of the silence around us, told me that he was right. We turned and went down the mountain by the same route we had come up, moving fast, and I did not look back. That night Peter Perkins Pitchlynn called me at the station. He had found something in the Apukshnubi journals. There is a passage from the winter of 1831, Peter said. Apukshinobi describes a period when the creature stopped moving. It stayed in one place on the north face for 19 days. During those 19 days, 7 people from the surrounding settlements disappeared. Not hikers, not strangers. Our people. People who knew the mountain and its dangers. What happened after the 19 days, I asked. Peter was quiet for a moment. Apukshinobi does not say, he told me. The entry just stops. The next entry in the journal is from 3 months later, and it is about corn harvest yields. Whatever happened at the end of those 19 days was something Apukshinobi chose not to record. The creature came to the ranger station on the 7th night. I need to be clear about what I am saying. I am not telling you that I heard something outside. I am not telling you that I found tracks near the building in the morning. I am telling you that at 2:14 in the morning, I was lying awake in my bunk and something stepped onto the wooden porch of the old rag ranger station and stood outside the front door and breathed. The sound of its breathing was what woke me fully. It was not the breathing of any animal I have ever heard. It was deep, resonant, almost mechanical in its regularity, and it carried a vibration that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. Each exhale lasted 4 or 5 seconds. Each inhale was longer, and between each breath there was a silence that felt like the mountain holding itself still. I lay in my bunk and I did not move. I did not reach for my flashlight. I did not reach for the radio. I lay there and I listened, and I could feel, through the wooden floor and the frame of the bunk and the thin mattress beneath me, the weight of the thing standing on the other side of the wall. Folsom was in the next room. I heard his bunk creak once, the sound of someone shifting position, and then nothing. Either he was asleep or he was doing what I was doing, lying still, not breathing, waiting. The creature stood on the porch for 11 minutes. I know this because I counted seconds the way I had been trained to count seconds in emergency situations. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and I reached 660 before the breathing stopped and the weight lifted from the porch boards and the sound of footsteps, enormous, measured, impossibly heavy, moved away from the building and into the night. I waited another 10 minutes before I got up. I went to the window and looked out. The clearing around the station was flooded with moonlight, and at the far edge of the tree line I saw something that I will carry with me for whatever years remain of my life. It was standing between 2 oaks at the edge of the forest. It was facing the station. It was enormous, a shape that was almost human but elongated, stretched, as though someone had taken the blueprint for a man and pulled it upward until the proportions became wrong. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms hung past its knees, and its head, which was massive and blocky and covered in the same reddish-brown hair that Big LaFleur and I had found on the ridge, was tilted slightly to one side in a posture that I recognized with a jolt of pure horror. It was curious. It was not hunting. It was not threatening. It was studying the building and the lights and the vehicles parked outside the way a person might study an anthill, with detached, patient interest. And in that moment I understood what Tunkasila had tried to tell me, what Greenwood had been trying to tell me, what the carvings on the summit oak had been warning about for centuries. This was not an animal. This was not a monster. This was something that thought, something that considered, something that made decisions based on criteria I could not imagine. It stood there for perhaps 30 seconds. Then it turned, and the speed with which it moved was the most terrifying thing I had witnessed up to that point. One moment it was at the tree line. The next moment it was gone, absorbed into the forest with a silence that should have been impossible for something of its size. The only evidence of its passage was a branch that swung back into place like a door closing. Folsom was standing behind me. I had not heard him get up. "Now you know," he said. I did not answer because there was nothing to say. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and dread. The trail was closed. Peter and Jack Pitchlynn arrived at the station with copies of every relevant passage from the Apukshinobi journals. Greenwood brought Tunkasila down from the cabin, and the old man sat in the station kitchen and spoke for hours in his language while Greenwood translated and Peter took notes and Jack stood by the window watching the tree line with an expression I had seen on the faces of soldiers in war zones. Tunkasila told us about the seasons. He said the creature had cycles, long periods of movement followed by short periods of stillness, and that the periods of stillness were the ones to fear. During the movement cycles, it was what the outside world imagined: a shadow in the wilderness, a story told around campfires, a blurred shape in a photograph that could be explained away. But during the stillness, it became something else. It became focused, it became intentional, and it became hungry. Not for food the way an animal is hungry, but for something that Tunkasila could not name in any language. Something that had to do with presence, with awareness, with the quality of attention that a living mind directs at the world around it. It feeds on being seen, Greenwood translated. Tunkasila says it needs to be witnessed. It needs someone to stand before it and know that it is real. And when it cannot find that witness, it takes people until someone notices. "The missing hikers," I said. Greenwood nodded. They saw it, and it took them because their seeing was not enough. "Nitakachi," Jack said from the window. "That is why it took Nitakachi. He went up the mountain to track it. He was the one person who truly saw it, who understood what he was looking at, and it took him because even his understanding was not sufficient." "What would be sufficient?" I asked. Nobody answered. On the fourth night I went up the mountain alone. I did not tell Folsom. I did not tell Greenwood or Peter or Jack. I took my flashlight and a handheld radio and nothing else, and I drove to the lower parking lot and walked up the ridge trail in the moonlight until I reached the scramble section and the exposed granite of the upper mountain. It was waiting for me at the summit oak. It stood beside the tree where Pushmataha had carved his warning, and it was bigger than I had estimated from the window of the station. 9 feet tall at least, perhaps more. Its hair was the color of fallen leaves in November, a deep reddish-brown that caught the moonlight and held it in a way that made the creature seem to glow faintly against the night sky. Its face was broad and flat, the features compressed, the brow ridge heavy and protruding, the eyes set deep in sockets that were shadowed even in direct moonlight. It smelled of copper and rotting vegetation, and something else, something acrid and electric, like the air after a transformer blows. I stopped walking. I stood on the granite about 30 feet from it, and I looked at it and it looked at me, and neither of us moved. The wind came up the mountain from the valley and moved through the sparse vegetation on the summit and carried the creature's smell past me and into the night behind. The moon was high and nearly full, and in its light the granite ridge looked like the spine of something ancient and sleeping. Something that had been lying beneath the surface of Virginia since before there was a name for Virginia, or for the mountains, or for the people who walked upon them. The creature did not move. It stood beside the oak with one hand resting on the trunk, its fingers spread across the bark, covering the carvings that Pushmataha had made. It breathed in that deep, resonant way I had heard through the walls of the station, and each breath moved through me like a low-frequency pulse, like a sound below the range of hearing that I felt in my bones. I understood then what Tunkasila had meant. The creature was not waiting for prey. It was waiting for recognition. It was waiting for someone to stand before it and see it not as a monster, not as a curiosity, not as evidence, or a myth, or a line in a journal, but as what it was, a being, a thing that existed. A presence on this mountain that had been here longer than any of us, and that carried in its enormous, solitary frame a grief so vast that the only way to express it was to walk, endlessly, through the forests and the ridges and the hollows, leaving behind nothing but footprints and silence, and the faint chemical smell of a body that should not exist but did. I do not know how long I stood there. It could have been 5 minutes or 50. Time had lost its meaning on the summit of Old Rag. There was only the creature, and the tree, and the moon, and the granite and the wind, and the sensation, which I cannot explain and have never been able to explain since, that the mountain itself was watching. Not through the creature, through the stone, through the roots of the oak, through the lichen on the rocks and the moss in the crevices and the water running through the fractures in the granite 100 feet below where we stood. The creature moved its hand from the tree. It lowered its arm to its side. And then it did something that shattered every assumption I had ever held about what it was and what it wanted. It turned away from me. It turned and walked north along the ridgeline, moving with that impossible stride, 5 feet between each step, and as it walked it made a sound. Not a roar, not a howl, a low, continuous vocalization that rose and fell like a song or a prayer or a lament, a sound that carried across the summit and down into the hollows and echoed off the granite walls of the valley below. It was the loneliest sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of something that has been alone for so long that its solitude has become a physical force, a weight, a shape, an entity of its own. It walked north until it reached the end of the ridgeline, and then it descended into the forest on the far side. And the sound of its voice faded, and the mountain was silent again. I stood there until the moon set and the first gray light of morning appeared in the east. Then I went down. Greenwood was waiting at the trailhead. He was sitting on the hood of my truck with a thermos of coffee, and his face told me that he already knew. "You went up," he said. "Yes." "And you saw it?" "Yes." Greenwood poured coffee into a metal cup and handed it to me. His hands were steady, but his eyes were wet. "Pushmataha went up alone too," he said. "That is how the carvings got on the tree. He went up alone in the night, and he stood before it, and he saw it for what it was. And then he came down, and he carved his warning, and he never went up again." I asked Greenwood what happened to the missing hikers. He shook his head. "Some questions do not have answers that you can carry," he said. "Some questions have answers that will break the container you try to put them in." I thought about the 4 GPS units, the 4 satellite communicators, the 4 sets of experienced feet that had walked up a well-maintained trail and vanished as if the mountain had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. "What do we do?" I asked. Greenwood looked up at the ridgeline where Old Rag caught the first light of the new day and held it, glowing pale and ancient and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of the living things that crawled across its face. "We do what Pushmataha did," he said. "We give it its space. We warn those who will listen. And we remember that this mountain was here before us and will be here after us, and that the thing walking its ridges is as much a part of it as the granite and the oaks and the rain." Folsom closed the summit trail permanently. The official reason was geological instability, a story about fracturing in the granite near the scramble section that made the upper trail unsafe. Peter Perkins Pitchlynn filed the Apuk-Shinabi journals with the Tribal Historical Archive and placed a restriction on access that would last for 50 years. Jack Pitchlynn returned to his home and did not speak of what had happened, not then, not in the years that followed. Big LaFleur drove Tunkasila back to his home, and the old man died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later. Greenwood LaFleur remained in his cabin on the Fire Road, and on certain nights when the moon was full and the wind was right, he would sit on his porch and listen to the mountain, and sometimes, he told me, he could hear it walking. I transferred out of the Shenandoah district the following spring. I told myself it was for career reasons, a promotion to a district with more responsibility and better pay. But I knew the truth, and Folsom knew the truth, and Greenwood knew the truth. I left because I could not sleep in that station anymore. Every night, at some point between midnight and 3 in the morning, I would wake and lie still and listen for the sound of breathing on the other side of the wall. Most nights there was nothing, but on some nights, the nights when the moon was bright and the wind was calm and the mountain was wrapped in that particular silence that I had come to recognize and to fear, I would hear it, that deep, resonant, almost mechanical breathing, and I would feel, through the floor and the frame and the mattress, the weight of something standing just outside, patient and immense, waiting to be seen. I have not been back to Old Rag Mountain. I do not intend to go back. But I think about it every day. I think about the carvings on the oak and the footprints on the ridge and the sound of that voice rising and falling in the moonlight like a song that has been sung for 1,000 years and will be sung for 1,000 more. I think about Pushmataha and Mushulatubi and Nitakachi and Apuk-Shinubi and all the others who stood before that creature and tried to understand it and were either changed or consumed by the attempt. And I think about what Tunkasila said, translated through Greenwood's careful voice in the kitchen of the ranger station on a morning that seems now like it belongs to someone else's life. It feeds on being seen. It needs to be witnessed. It needs someone to stand before it and know that it is real. I stood before it. I saw it, and it let me go. I do not know why. I do not know what made my witness sufficient when so many others were not. I do not know if it found what it was looking for in my eyes that night on the summit of Old Rag Mountain, or if it simply decided that I was not worth taking. What I know is this: The mountain is still there. The oak is still there. The carvings are still there. And on the nights when the moon is full and the wind is calm and the ridgeline of Old Rag glows pale against the stars, the thing that Pushmataha named walks the granite spine from end to end, breathing its deep and ancient breath, leaving footprints in the thin soil between the rocks, and waiting, always waiting, for someone to look, for someone to see, for someone to understand what it is that walks without ending on the oldest mountain in the oldest range on the oldest land in this world. And if you are reading this, if you have made it to the end of this account, then I have one last thing to tell you. Stay off Old Rag Mountain after sunset. Stay off the ridge when the moon is full. And if you are ever standing in the forest on that mountain, and the birds stop singing and the wind stops blowing and you smell copper and rot and lightning in the air, do not run, do not scream, do not turn your back. Stand still. Let it see you. Let it know that you are there, that you are real, that you bear witness to its existence. And pray that your seeing is enough. The last words the hiker spoke into his phone, before the recording folded into wind, and then into a silence with no bottom to it, were that one of the boulders on the ridge had stood up and turned to look at him. 9 seconds. That is the whole of it. I have listened to those 9 seconds more times than I would ever admit to the people who file the reports and close the folders and drive home to sleep in warm houses at the bottom of the valley. There is the wind. There is a breath that is not the wind, close and wet against the little microphone. There is a voice, low and slow, shaping a sound that is almost a word and is not any word I know. Then there is nothing at all, which is worse than any scream could ever be. His name does not matter now, and out of respect for the family I will not give it. What matters is the mountain. What matters is that I sent him up the ridge trail on a bright cold morning at the end of October, with a wave and a bad joke about keeping his hands warm on the granite, and the mountain gave back to me only his pack, his left boot, and those 9 seconds of sound. I have worn the green and the gray of this park for 11 seasons on the eastern face of Old Rag Mountain, and my people were reading mountains long before there was a park to give this one a name. My grandfather, whom everyone in 3 counties simply called Tunkasila, which means only grandfather, carried in his mouth the stories his own grandfather had carried. And those stories reached back to a country far to the south of here, to the low green hills the Choctaw called home before the long walk west. He came to these Blue Ridge Mountains as an old man, following work and following family. And he used to say that the ridges here remembered the same things the hills of home remembered. He would tap the side of his nose whenever he said it. The mountains speak to one another, he told me. They keep the same secrets between them. You would do well, he said, to learn which of those secrets are yours to touch and which are not. I did not listen the way that I should have. I went away to school. I learned the names the maps use. I learned to read a contour line and a weather cell, and the particular helpless way a lost person moves when the panic finally takes them, always downhill, always toward the sound of running water. I built an entire life out of knowing things, and knowing things is a great comfort, right up until the hour the mountain shows you the ragged edge of everything you know and asks you, very softly, to take one step past it. Old Rag is the most beloved climb in this whole park, and it is also the one that hurts the most people. The summit is a jumble of granite the size of houses, a place we call the Rock Scramble, where the trail stops being a trail and becomes a puzzle you solve with your hands and your knees and a certain amount of faith. On a warm Saturday in summer, there might be 1,000 people threading through those boulders, laughing, taking pictures, sliding down the polished chutes. But this was the tale of October. The crowds long thinned, the leaves already gone from copper to brown to the bare gray bones of the trees, and the light failing earlier each afternoon as though someone were slowly turning down a lamp. The morning the hiker went missing, I was working out of the ranger station in the hollow with Pushmataha, who has been on this mountain longer than I have been alive, and who everyone, out of affection and a little fear, calls simply Push. Push is built like a doorway and moves like water, and in 11 years I have seen almost nothing rattle him. Our dispatcher that day was Folsom, a careful man with a soft voice who keeps the radio logs the way a church keeps its records, and our district supervisor, Greenwood LaFleur had driven up from the main office because the forecast was turning, and he wanted eyes on the high trails before the front came through. The call came in a little after 4 in the afternoon. A hiker, a young woman, half running down the saddle trail with her phone held out in front of her like a lantern. She had been coming down alone from the summit, and she had heard a man calling for help somewhere off the trail, up in the boulders below the false summit. A voice saying, help me," over and over in the same flat way. She had shouted back. She had asked where he was. And the voice, she said, had answered her by saying the exact same 3 words she had just used, in her own cadence, "Help me, where are you?" before it went quiet. She had not gone to look. Something in the sound of it, she told us, her hands shaking around a paper cup of coffee, had made every hair on her body stand up, and she had come down the mountain faster than she had ever come down anything in her life. Push and I looked at one another across the little office. Folsom stopped writing, and Greenwood LaFleur, who was a practical man and a good one, said what any of us would have said, that a hiker was hurt in the rocks and that we would go and bring him home before the weather closed the mountain for the night. We were half right. A hiker was up there. But we did not bring him home, and by the time the front rolled over the ridge that evening and the first hard rain began to fall, I had begun to understand that my grandfather had not been telling me stories at all. He had been trying to teach me the rules. The trail goes wrong. We went up in the last good light, 4 of us, Push and I, and 2 of the seasonal rangers, Peter Perkins Pitchlin, a steady older man who had spent 30 years surveying timber before he came to the park, and his nephew Jack Pitchlin, who was barely 20 and so new to the green uniform that it still creased sharp at the shoulders. Greenwood LaFleur stayed at the station to work the radio and coordinate with the county, and Folsom logged our departure at 4:32, 4 souls up the saddle trail toward the summit. Weather front expected by nightfall. For the first mile it was only a hard hike up a cold mountain. The trail climbed steeply through oak and hickory gone bare for the winter, the leaf litter thick and loud underfoot, and we called out as we went, "The way you do," our voices bouncing back thin from the rocks above. We found the young woman's story easy to believe, because a scared person in the woods will hear a great many things, and echoes off granite can do strange work on a human voice. Push led. He always leads. And I remember that somewhere past the second switchback he stopped and lifted his hand, and we all went still, and the whole mountain went still with us. There were no birds. That was the first thing I noticed, though it took me a long moment to understand what I was noticing. It was late October, and the woods should have been alive with the small business of winter birds, the chickadees and the nuthatches and the little brown creepers going up the trunks, and the far knock of a woodpecker working a dead tree. Instead, there was nothing, not one wing, not one call. The silence had a pressure to it, the way the air has a pressure before a storm, and I found myself breathing shallow without knowing why. Then, from somewhere high above us and off to the left, came a single sharp crack. Wood on wood. A hard, deliberate knock, like a man swinging a heavy branch against the trunk of a tree with everything he had. It rang out once and stopped. We all turned toward it. Jack, the young one, gave a nervous laugh and said it was probably a limb coming down, a widowmaker letting go in the wind. But there was no wind just then. The air was as flat and still as water in a cup. And from far off on the other side of the trail, from our right and slightly below, another crack answered it. One knock, then silence. Then, from the first place, 2 knocks in quick reply. Peter Perkins Pitchlin had gone very quiet. He had put a hand on his nephew's arm, and when I looked at Push, the man I had never once seen rattled in 11 years, I saw that the color had gone out of his face, and that he was listening to those knocks the way you listen to a language you were told about as a child but hoped you would never have to hear spoken aloud. It was Peter Perkins Pitchlin, the old timberman, who found the first of the structures. And it was the structures that finally took the last of the argument out of me. Just off the trail, in a stand of young pine, someone had taken living saplings, trees as thick as my wrist, and bent them down and woven them together into an arch. A great doorway of living wood taller than a man, the trunks twisted around one another in a way that no wind and no ice storm has ever made. Beyond it, deeper in the pines, there were others. Whole young trees snapped off clean at the height of my chest, not broken by weight and not broken by weather, but wrung apart. The pale wood splintered and bright, and stacked in leaning shapes against the standing trunks. Peter walked to the edge of that woven arch and would not go through it. He had spent 30 years in timber, and he had never once in his life seen a tree bent like that and left alive. And he stood there with his hand on the cold living wood and told me, very quietly, that this was a wall, that we had walked all the way up to the edge of something's country, and that the arch was the gate, and that everything past it belonged to whatever had made it. We found the pack a few hundred yards higher, at the edge of the boulder field where the trees thin and the granite begins. It was a good pack, an expensive one, sitting upright and neatly against a rock as though its owner had simply set it down to rest and would be back in a moment. His left boot lay 6 feet away, in the middle of the trail, the laces still tied. Not untied, tied in a double knot, as though the foot had been drawn out of it whole while the knot held. There was no blood. There was no sign of a fall, no scuff of a slide down the rocks, no torn brush where a man might have gone over the edge. There was only the pack and the boot, and all around us in the fading light a smell that I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget. I have gutted deer. I have found things in these woods weeks after they died. I know the honest, sad, ordinary smell of a dead animal, and this was not that. This was thick and living and wrong. It was musk and rot and wet fur and something underneath it all like sulfur, like a struck match, like the breath of something that eats things no clean animal would touch. It hung in the cold air in a wall, and you could walk into the edge of it and then out again, and where it was strongest the ground felt colder, and the quiet felt deeper, and every animal part of my brain that the school had spent years trying to educate was screaming a single word, which was run. Push crouched by the pack and did not touch it. He looked at the boot. He looked at the rocks above us, where the granite piled up toward the false summit in shapes that the failing light was turning from stone into faces and back into stone again. And in a low voice, not to any of us, he said a word I did not know. An old word, soft and full of edges. I asked him what he had said. He did not answer me. He stood, and he said only that we were going back down, all of us, right now, and that we would come back for this poor man at first light with the county, and with more people than a mountain would dare to take at once. That was when Jack Pitchlynn, 20 years old and full of the certainty that only the very young and the very foolish can afford, cupped his hands around his mouth, and before any of us could stop him, he shouted up into the rocks, into the smell, into that terrible listening silence. "The one thing you must never do," he shouted, "is anybody up there?" And the mountain answered him. From high in the boulders, in a voice that was almost Jack's own voice, close and clear, and pushed out through something that was never built to make human words, it said back to us, "Is anybody up there?" What Tunkasila knew. We got down the mountain in the last of the light with the storm breaking over the ridge behind us, and I will tell you honestly that we did not walk. We came down that trail at a controlled fall, Push in front breaking trail with his flashlight, Peter Perkins Pitchlynn with a hard hand fisted in the back of his nephew's collar, and me at the rear. And it took everything I had not to look behind me, because the whole way down I could hear it pacing us, not chasing, pacing, off in the tree line to our right, at a distance. Something heavy was moving through terrain that no man could have crossed at that speed in the gloom, moving with us, matching us, and every so often it would knock once on a tree, and the knock would come from a little further ahead of us each time, as though it were hurting us, as though it wanted to be sure we understood which way we were meant to go. When the trees finally opened into the clearing at the station, and the yellow light of the windows fell across the wet grass, the pacing stopped. Just stopped, all at once, at the exact edge of the light, the way a thing stops at a line it has decided not to cross. Folsom logged our return at 6:19, and Greenwood LaFleur took one look at our faces and did not ask the questions a supervisor is supposed to ask. He got us inside. He got coffee into our hands. And Push, who had not spoken more than 10 words since the boulder field, sat down heavily at the table and told Greenwood that we needed to bring in old Nitakachi and that we needed to call his grandfather. Now I want to stop here for a moment, because I know how this sounds, and I know that some of you listening to me right now are the way I used to be. You believe in the map and the weather cell and the honest science of a search and rescue. You believe that a scared young woman hears echoes, and that a smell in the woods is a dead bear, and that a voice in the rocks is a trick of stone and fear. I believed all of that too. I had spent my whole adult life believing it, and if you are still walking this mountain beside me, still here with me in your ears as the rain comes down, then I am going to ask you for one small thing before we go any higher, because where we are going now the air gets thin, and the company gets scarce, and there is no room up there for anyone who will not stay close. If you have not yet pressed that like button, press it now, not for my sake. Do it for the next person that the search sends up this mountain, so that this story finds them before they go, so that they hear these rules before the mountain teaches them the hard way. And if you know the old kind of story, the kind your own grandparents tried to tell you before you were too clever to listen, then leave it in the comments below, because someone reading this needs to know they are not the only one. Then come back and stay close to me, because I am about to tell you exactly what came down out of those rocks, and why my grandfather had spent my whole childhood trying to prepare me for a night I swore would never come. They brought Tunkasila up from the valley in the back of Greenwood's truck, a very old man wrapped in a wool blanket, and they brought Nitakechi too, older even than my grandfather, a woman who had known these mountains for 90 years, and who walked into that warm, bright station out of the storm, and stopped in the doorway, and lifted her chin, and breathed in through her nose. She smelled it on us. The wrongness. It had come down the mountain in our clothes and our hair, and she smelled it, and her old face folded into something that was not fear exactly but was very close to grief. My grandfather made me sit down in front of him. He took my hands in his, which were cold and thin as birds, and he asked me one question. He asked whether the young one had answered it, whether anyone had spoken back to the voice in the rocks, and I told him yes. I told him that Jack had shouted up into the boulders and asked if anybody was there, and that the thing had said the words back to us in Jack's own voice. And my grandfather closed his eyes, and Nitakechi made a low sound in her throat, and the two old people looked at one another across that little room, and I understood that something had been decided that could not now be undone. Then Tunkasila told us the story he had been carrying his whole life, the story his grandfather, an old man named Apukshanubi, had carried before him, brought 1,000 miles from the green hills of the south to these gray northern ridges, because that old man had always known, he said, that the walking thing was not bound to one country. It went where the deep woods went. It had followed the mountains north the way water follows a channel. In the country of his grandfather's grandfather, he said, there was a being the people knew and did not speak of lightly. It was tall, far taller than any man, and it walked upright on 2 legs, and yet was not a man and was not a bear, and was not any animal the people had ever named. It kept to the deepest woods and the high broken places where people did not go, and for the most part it wanted only to be left alone. But it was a hunter, and it hunted in a way that no honest animal hunts. It could throw its voice. It could take a sound it heard, the cry of a child, the call of a hunter to his brother, the bark of a dog, and it could give that sound back to you changed, use it to draw you off your path and out into the trees where it waited. The old people had a name for the tall shadow that stood in the woods and called with a stolen voice, and my grandfather said that name aloud only once, softly, and then would not say it again. Nalusa Falaya, he said, the long being, the one that lies in wait. The rules were simple, he told me, and they were older than any of us, and they had kept his people alive in the deep woods for more generations than anyone could count. You do not answer it when it calls. If you hear your own name, or a voice you love, or a cry for help out in the trees where no person should be, you do not answer, and you do not go to it, because the moment you answer, it knows you. It learns the shape of your voice, and it takes it, and then it can wear you like a coat and call the next person with your throat. You do not look for it. You do not look into its eyes if you are unlucky enough to see them shine, high up in the trees, higher than any animal's eyes have a right to be. And if it has marked you, if it has taken something of yours, then you leave a gift at the edge of its country, something of value, given with respect and without fear, and you walk away, and you do not look back, not once, no matter what voice calls after you. I asked him then about the arch of living wood, and about the trees wrung apart and stacked in the pines, because the memory of them would not leave me alone. And it was Nitakechi who answered me. "Those are its markers," she said. "The way a wolf marks the edge of its range. The tall one bends the living trees and stacks the broken wood to say, 'This far and no farther. This is mine.'" She told me that we had done a dangerous thing already, all of us, simply by walking through that gate and up into its country, and that the boy had done a far more dangerous thing by speaking there. Then she gave me one last rule, and she made me say it back to her twice before she was satisfied. "You never touch the markers," she said. "You never break the woven trees or scatter the stacked wood, not to study it, not to prove to yourself that a man could have made it, not for any reason at all. Because to pass through its gate with respect is one thing, and a thing it may forgive. But to break its wall is to answer it in the one language it can never ignore, and a thing that will only watch the man who passes through with respect will follow the man who breaks his way in all the way home." Jack Pitchlynn had answered it, and now, my grandfather said, it knew his voice, and it would come for him. The second night, Greenwood LaFleur did what a supervisor has to do. He got on the phone to the county sheriff and to the regional office, and he reported a missing hiker on Old Rag, presumed lost in the boulder field, search to resume at first light with a full team. He did not report the rest. There is no box on any form for the rest. And I did not blame him, because I have been the one holding that phone, and I know that there are true things you cannot say into it without ending your own career and helping no one at all. That night we did not send anyone back up the mountain. We could not have, with the storm, and none of us would have gone. We stayed at the station, all of us, Push and Peter and Jack and Folsom and Greenwood, and the two old ones, Tunkasila and Nitakechi, who would not leave, who said that this night was the dangerous one, the first night after it had taken a voice, and that we would all be safer together inside the light with the doors shut than scattered across the valley in our beds. Nitakechi did something before the light went low. She went out to the edge of the clearing, right to the line where the yard light gave way to the black wall of the trees, and she set down there a folded cloth, and on the cloth she laid dried meat and tobacco and a small worked thing of silver that I understood to be very old and very precious to her. She spoke to the tree line in the old language, low and steady, without a tremor of fear in her voice, and I asked my grandfather what she was saying, and he told me she was being polite. She was telling the tall one that we knew it was there, that we meant it no disrespect, that we were leaving its country in the morning and taking our noise with us, and that the gift was payment for the boy's foolishness. "Respect," my grandfather said, "is the only thing it has ever understood. Not weapons, not fire, not shouting. Only respect, offered without fear, because fear is a scent to it, and the scent of fear is an invitation." For a while it seemed to work. The storm blew itself out around midnight, and the woods went quiet, an honest quiet, and we began, some of us, to breathe. Folsom made a fresh pot of coffee. Peter Perkins Pitchlynn got his nephew to lie down on the cot in the back room, and the boy, exhausted past his fear, actually slept. And I sat by the window with my grandfather's cold hand in mine and watched the tree line and told myself that the worst of it was over, that we would go up in the daylight with 30 people and dogs and radios, that a thing that fears fire and respects a gift is a thing that can be managed, that even now the map and the science had not entirely left me. Then, at some hour deep in the night, when the fire in the wood stove had burned down to a red glow and half of us were dozing in our chairs, Jack Pitchlynn began to talk in his sleep. We all heard it, a murmur from the back room, the boy's voice, soft and content, the way a person talks to someone they are glad to see. Peter got up first, and I followed him, and we stood in the doorway of that little back room, and in the dull red light of the coals we saw Jack lying on the cot with his eyes closed, smiling, having a conversation. He would say a few words, and then he would go quiet, as though listening, and then he would answer. And I realized with a slow horror that was worse than any sudden scare that he was answering questions. Someone was asking him things, and he was telling them, murmuring in his sleep, and I could only hear his half of it. He was saying yes. He was saying, "I am here." He was saying, "Out by the window. They are all out by the window, and old Nitakechi, she is the one who left the gift." And underneath his voice, so low that I felt it in my chest more than I heard it in my ears, coming from the black square of the window at the head of his cot, from the other side of the glass, From the wall of the night pressed right up against the station, something was murmuring back to him. Peter Perkins Pitchlynn crossed that room in 2 strides and clamped his hand over his nephew's mouth. The boy's eyes flew open, wide and confused and afraid, and the murmuring at the window stopped as though a switch had been thrown. And then something struck the outside wall of the station. One blow, enormous, so hard that the whole building shook, and a coffee cup walked off the table and shattered on the floor, and every one of us was on our feet in an instant. It was not a fallen branch, it was not the wind, it was a blow at the height of the eaves, higher than the top of the doorway, higher than any of us could have reached with a thrown stone, delivered against the wall of that station by something standing in the yard in the middle of the night, something tall enough to knock on the roofline, and it had come, exactly as my grandfather said it would, for the boy who had answered it. My grandfather was on his feet too, that ancient man, and he was not afraid. He put himself between the window and his people, and he began to speak to the thing beyond the glass, loud and steady and full of a authority I had never heard in him. And I understood that whatever came next, the science was gone from me now, gone completely, and that the only thing standing between us and the tall shadow in the yard was an old man and a set of rules 1,000 years old. They took Jack at dawn. That is the part that I have never been able to make sense of, even now, and I have gone over it 10,000 times. We had survived the night. The blow against the wall was the last of it, and after Tunkasila spoke to the thing beyond the glass it withdrew, and we heard it move off across the yard and back into the trees, and the rest of that terrible night passed in a held breath, all of us awake, all of us watching, the boy in the center of us where the tall one could not reach. When the first gray light came up over the ridge we should have been safe. Daylight was the rule. Daylight was the one thing that had always been true. But there is an hour before the true dawn, a thin gray hour when the black of the woods has not yet become the green of the woods, when the shapes have not yet decided what they are. And in that hour, with the county trucks not yet arrived and the 7 of us slack with exhaustion, Jack Pitchlynn stood up from his cot, and he walked to the door of the station, and he opened it, and he walked out into the gray, following a voice that only he could hear. By the time Peter came awake and understood that the cot was empty, the boy was already across the clearing, already at the tree line, already stepping over old Nettaketchie's untouched gift and into the woods, walking toward the mountain, walking toward the summit and the rock scramble and the boulder field where it had all begun, with a slow and dreaming and terrible calm. We went after him. Of course we went after him. Push and Peter and I, straight up the saddle trail in the gray light with the mist pouring down off the summit like smoke, and behind us Greenwood LaFleur on the radio screaming for the county to hurry, and my grandfather, that impossible old man, coming up the trail behind us as fast as his thin legs would carry him because he understood something the rest of us did not, and he was shouting it up the mountain at us as he came. Do not call his name. Whatever you do, do not call the boy's name. It will use it. We could see Jack ahead of us on the trail, a small figure moving up into the boulder field, unhurried, sure-footed, drawn, and every animal instinct in my body wanted to scream his name up that mountain, to call him back, and I bit it down. I swallowed it, because my grandfather's voice was hammering in my skull, and instead we ran. We simply ran, closing the distance, and the higher we climbed, the stronger the smell became. That wall of musk and rot and struck matches until near the top of the boulder field it was so thick that Push doubled over and gagged and kept climbing anyway. The stones began before we reached the summit rocks. The first one came down out of the mist from above us and to the left and struck the granite beside Push's head with a crack that threw sparks off the stone. A rock the size of a fist, thrown hard and thrown to miss, thrown as a warning. Then another, and another, whistling down out of the gray from somewhere we could not see, rattling and cracking off the boulders all around us, and not one of them touched us, because it was not trying to hurt us. It was telling us to turn back, and when we did not turn back, when we kept climbing toward the small dreaming figure of the boy above us, it screamed. I have no better word for it, and no word I own is good enough. It was not a howl, and it was not a roar. It was a scream that began low as a bull and climbed up and up past anything a living throat should be able to make. a sound that came down off the summit rocks and rolled over us and went out across the whole valley, and I felt it in the fillings of my teeth and in the marrow of my bones. Push, who I had never in 11 years seen afraid, pressed himself flat against the wet granite and put his arm up over his head, and for one long moment every one of us understood, completely and finally, that we were prey and that we had climbed of our own free will into the mouth of the thing that owned this mountain. It was Peter who got us moving again. He was the only one of us who could, because it was his own nephew up there in the rocks. And a man will climb toward a scream that would send any sane creature running if the thing at the top of it carries his blood. So we climbed, up into the last of the mist, into the very heart of that smell, up the slick black granite toward the boy and the tall shadow that was calling him home. The rock scramble in the gray dawn mist is a place out of a nightmare even on an ordinary day. The granite piles up in shapes as big as buildings, black and slick with the night's rain, and the mist moves between them so that the whole world is 30 feet across and then is nothing. And somewhere up in those rocks, hidden in the shifting gray, the tall one was calling to the boy, and the boy was climbing to it, and we were climbing after them both, blind, through a smell like the inside of a grave. I saw it once, and only for a moment, and I have never told anyone the whole of what I saw until right now. I came around the shoulder of an enormous granite block, and the mist thinned for the space of a breath, and there, 20 feet above me on the summit rocks, it was standing. It was the height of 2 men. It stood on 2 legs, and its arms hung long past where a man's arms would end, and it was covered in hair that was not brown and was not black but was the no color of shadow itself, so that even standing in the open it seemed half made of the gloom around it. It was turned away from me, toward Jack, who had climbed almost to it, and its head was lowered to the boy, and from its throat, wearing Peter Perkins Pitchland's own voice, it was saying, "Come on, son. That is it. Come to me, son." Almost there, and then it turned its head, not its body, only its head, all the way around, until it was looking back down the rocks directly at me, and I saw its eyes, and its eyes were catching the gray light and throwing it back the way an animal's eyes do in a flashlight beam. 2 coins of pale fire, far too high off the ground, looking straight into me. And every rule my grandfather ever taught me went out of my head, and I nearly looked away. And looking away is the one thing you must never do, because to look away is to give it your back. I did not look away. I do not know how. I held its gaze, those 2 burning coins in that black, impossible face, and I did the only thing left to me. I took from around my own neck the thing my grandfather had pressed into my hand at the station in the night, a small worked pendant of my grandmother's, the most precious thing I own, and I held it up in the gray light where the tall one could see it, and I set it down on the rock in front of me, and I spoke to it in the few words of the old language that my grandfather had made me learn as a boy, words I had thought were only sounds. Words I understood in that instant were a prayer and an apology and a payment all at once. I told it we were leaving. I told it the boy was ours, and that we were taking him and going, and that we meant no disrespect to its country. And I did not let one thread of fear into my voice, though the fear in me was a living thing clawing to get out, because fear is the scent that invites it, and my grandfather's whole life had been spent teaching me that the tall one does not respect the strong or the clever or the armed. It respects only the one who stands before it without fear, and offers what is precious and asks to be let go. For a long moment, the longest moment of my life, it looked at me. The mist curled between us. Somewhere below, I could hear my grandfather's cracked old voice climbing the mountain, calling out the same words, that we were leaving, that the gift was given. And then, very slowly, the tall one straightened up to its full and terrible height, and it turned away from the boy. And it looked one last time down at me with those 2 coins of pale fire, and then the mist closed over it, and it was gone. Not run, not fled. Withdrawn, the way the tide withdraws, on its own time, having decided, for reasons I will never know, to let us keep what we had come to take. Jack Pitchland came back to us on the summit rocks like a man surfacing from deep water. One moment he was standing at the top of the scramble with his hand raised toward the empty mist, and the next he simply crumpled, and Peter caught him, and the boy woke up screaming and did not stop screaming for a long time. He had no memory of the night. He had no memory of the voice, or the walk up the mountain in the gray dawn, or the tall thing that had worn his uncle's throat to call him. The last thing he remembered was lying down on the cot in the warm station, and being glad, so glad, to hear a familiar voice through the window, telling him everything was going to be all right. He does not work on the mountain anymore. He does not go into the woods at all, any woods, and I do not think he ever will again. Some things a person carries out of the trees that never leave them, even when the memory itself is gone. The body remembers what the mind is merciful enough to forget. The county came, and the dogs came, and for 3 days a full search team went over that mountain inch by inch, and they never found the hiker. Greenwood LaFleur's own father, the huge old man that everyone in the valley had called Big LaFleur since before I was born, came up to the station and sat with us through all 3 of those days, too old now to climb the mountain but far too stubborn to stay away from it. And it was he who kept the coffee going and kept the young rangers steady when the search kept coming back with nothing. The county sent up their finest tracker as well, a quiet, careful man named Mushalatubby who had found more lost hunters in these ridges than any person living, and even he walked that boulder field for 3 long days and came down each evening shaking his head, because there was nothing up there to track. There was nothing at all, only the pack, and the boot, and a wall of that wrong smell hanging in the pines that made the dogs sit down on the trail and refuse to climb 1 step higher, no matter how their handlers pulled at them. They never found so much as another thread of him. The pack and the boot went into an evidence locker, and then into a cold case file, and the official report says that a young man was lost in difficult terrain on Old Rag Mountain in late October, and that his remains were never recovered, which happens, they will tell you, more often than the public would ever believe. That is the true part. His remains were never recovered. The mountain kept him. The mountain keeps what it takes, and it does not give it back. And there is no team of searchers on this earth that could have found what was left of that poor young man, because the thing that took him does not leave anything to find. Old Nitakechi went back down to the valley, and lived another 2 winters, and then passed. The last person in these mountains who had known the old ways from the inside, and I sat with her at the end, and the last thing she said to me was that I had done well up there in the rocks, that I had remembered when it counted, and that my grandfather had not wasted his breath on me after all. My grandfather, Tunkasila, is gone now too. He lived long enough to see me finally understand him, and I think that was all he had been waiting for. I have his blanket. I do not have my grandmother's pendant. It is still up there on the summit rocks where I set it down. My gift, my payment, and I have never gone back for it, and I never will. Because here is the thing that I most need you to understand. The thing I have kept for the very end. It is still up there. The tall one, the long being, the one my grandfather would name only once and then never again. It did not die. It cannot be killed, not by us, not by any weapon we have ever brought into its country. And it was on this mountain long before the first of us climbed it, and it will be here long after the last of us is gone. Every season, thousands of you drive up into this park and lace your boots and go up Old Rag to stand on that summit and take your pictures in the wind. And almost all of you come home, and you never know how close you walked to it, or how many of you it watched from the tree line, deciding, the way it decided about me, whether you were worth the trouble. Almost all of you come home. But every year, on this mountain, and on 100 mountains like it, up and down these ancient ridges, a few do not. A hiker who stepped off the trail for just a moment, a voice on a phone that folds into wind and then into nothing, a pack sitting upright and neat against a rock, as though its owner had only set it down to rest. And the folders close, and the seasons turn, and the mountain keeps its secrets, exactly as my grandfather always said it would. So I am going to leave you with the rules. The same rules that were carried 1,000 miles out of the green hills of the south to these gray northern mountains. The same rules that kept my grandfather's people alive in the deep woods for more generations than anyone can count, and the same rules that are the only reason I am here to tell you any of this at all. When you are in the high woods, in the deep places, and you hear a voice out among the trees where no person should be, a cry for help, or your own name, or a voice you love, you do not answer it. You do not go to it. If you see eyes shining back at you from too high off the ground, you do not look away, and you do not run. Because to a hunter, a turn back is a gift. And if you ever feel it, that wall of wrong smell, that pressure in the air, That terrible listening quiet, where even the birds have gone silent. Then you set down something precious, and you offer it without fear, and you walk out of its country, and you do not look back, not once, no matter what calls after you. I have kept this mountain for many years now, and I will keep it for many more, and I have made a kind of peace with the tall one that shares it with me, a peace built on respect and on distance and on the old rules my grandfather gave me. But I do not go up to the summit alone anymore, and on the cold, still evenings at the end of October, when the crowds are gone and the light fails early and the woods go quiet, I sometimes stand at the edge of the clearing where old Nita Ketchy left her gift, and I look up toward the black shape of the mountain against the last of the sky, and I know that it is up there, standing among the rocks in the gathering gloom, patient and ancient and watching, and I go back inside, and I shut the door, and I am grateful, every single time, that I remembered the rules. If this story kept you company on your own lonely road tonight, then do this for me before you go. Subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell, so that the next story finds you the way this one did. Leave a comment and tell me the name of the mountain nearest to where you are sitting right now, the one you can see from your own window, because I promise you it has its own tall shadow standing somewhere in its high woods, and its own old rules, and someone in these comments will know them. And press that like button one more time on your way out, so that the search sends this warning up the mountain to the next person who laces their boots and goes up alone. Stay on the trail. Do not answer the voice. And whatever you do, when you walk out of the deep woods, do not look back.